each of you guys to give us a brief introduction, who you are, your organization, and if you can tell us a little bit about when your company first embraced blockchain technology.
Cool. I'll kick us off. Hey, everybody. I'm Max Comparetto. I work for Salesforce. I am based in New York. I've been with Salesforce for 5 years now. I've been working in block space for 2 years officially, in personal interest in crypto and blockchain since 2017. Salesforce started working on blockchain technology or products in 2017, 2018, first run. That got shut down, so no innovation without failure and learning. So that was our first intro. I'll leave it at that and get into it more later, but turn it over to you, Jeff.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Gauss. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of the Provenance Chain Network. We deliver trust through commercial transparency. We exist for 3 reasons: national security, environmental sustainability, consumer protection. And I first got interested in blockchain in the 2016 timeframe. My company got started to build a blockchain, actually a distributed ledger solution. And so we've been at it from the very beginning.
Hey everybody, Jeff Kramer. I'm the technical advisor to the CTO at Microsoft with a focus in Web3, payments, and a variety of other things. Before Microsoft, I've only been there about 10 months. Before Microsoft, I actually had a startup called Transparent Systems, and we built a digital dollar within the US market. So real-time, end-to-end on transfer of unlimited amounts of money, 24/7, 365, as a dollar. I've been interested in blockchain for a really long time. Microsoft itself has been involved in blockchain since at least 2017. Was put off a little bit. I tried to think about the exact time frame for Microsoft. Yeah, so excited to be here.
Great. What I'd like to do is really dive into some of the how you guys look at blockchain technology from a strategic perspective in terms of how it improves the lives of people, how it improves business processes. So if you can tell me a little bit about, how do your organization's products benefit real people and benefit organizations?
Yeah, so as far as what we've developed, I'll start there just so people have some context for what we built. In 2017, when I mentioned we started working on blockchain technology, 2018 we brought a commercial product to market. The product didn't necessarily launch beyond pilot, so the pilot started and stopped somewhat abruptly. The idea of that product was essentially, let's provide brands that are Salesforce customers with a means of using Salesforce to develop permissioned networks and invite other parties into these permissioned networks, configure the settings and accessibility and governance criteria or parameters of that permission network. So you invite another member of a supply chain, for example, into that network, and you say, these are the delegated rights and permissions of this party in the network. So they have this level of visibility and access to read content or data from this network or from this blockchain. They can take these actions. They can create these types of assets or data points in the network and share data seamlessly between those different members of the supply chain, for example. So it made it very easy to access information across different parties in a network. So people could seamlessly exchange data and information that they needed to conduct business and operate with more efficiency. So I would say it was an efficiency gain and kind of a system for controlling who gets to see and do what.
And to go a little bit deeper on that, so you mentioned the first effort didn't succeed. Why didn't it succeed?
Digging deep here. No, I'm kidding. I wasn't involved. I think we were talking about this backstage, actually. So it's very challenging to go to market with a product that is people derive value from. That's different than how people are incentivized to sell it. So there's somewhat of a misalignment between our go-to-market strategy and the way that value was derived or realized from leveraging the technology. So you had salespeople at Salesforce who primarily were concerned with and incentivized by selling a product to a single party. But they were looking to sell a solution that had multiple parties being invited into a network, those other parties that weren't necessarily belonging to an individual seller or account executive at the company. So it was like a little bit of a rift between those incentive models. And then too, like, people were concerned with sharing data at the time across companies. So there were those challenges as well, yeah.
Makes sense. Jeff?
So I think we tend to look at things a little bit differently because I don't believe Web 3.0, Web 3 is an industry, it's purely a technology. And I've been involved in the introduction of computer telephony integration and mobile computing and cloud computing. And I've never met anybody that wants to go out and buy this technology. What they're interested in is they buy the solution. The way that the metaphor that I use for that is I'm a weekend warrior, carpenter, et cetera. When I go to Home Depot, I'm not going to Home Depot to buy a drill. And I'm not even going to buy a hole in the wall. What I'm buying is the picture hanging on the wall. And so the way we approached it when we came to market, or when we first started, is we envisioned this woman, this persona, we call her Conscious Kim. And so Conscious Kim is in her late 20s, early 30s. She's at early stages of household formation. She's educated by global standards. She's affluent. So she's in a retail environment, and she's interacting with products. And so what we envisioned was those products revealing themselves to her based on her values. Now, what's actually going on there is her digital twin is interacting with the digital twin of the product, and there's a smart contract data exchange there. Well, to be able to do that, you got to go get all of this data from the supply chain. And so we focused on an atomic particle, which was a sales order, purchase order transaction, which is completely recursive the entire way through the commerce chain. So if you could figure out how to capture the right data from that, then you can use permission sets to say who gets to see what. So one of the things that people are concerned about with transparency, especially when they talk about quote unquote the blockchain, which there is no such thing, is all of my data is going to be available to everybody. Well, no, it's not, because transparency is credentials plus vantage point. So that's how we look at it.
Interesting. And I'm going to come back. I got a bunch of questions there, sure. But I'm going to let Jeff Kramer. Can you tell us just a little bit about how Microsoft approaches Web3, and because it operates in so many, across so many sectors, how does that impact the products across multiple sectors over at Microsoft?
Certainly, yeah. So I'll be clear that I'm going to talk for myself and not for Microsoft as a whole.
Yeah.
So Microsoft, we had a very well-publicized effort to bring nodes to the market early in blockchain evolution, or like early-ish. And we shut that all down. And we've been working in a much more tactical way with third parties, enabling them on Azure. So that's a big push for us. And we've signed a bunch of deals with different companies in order to make that happen. And then the other side of it is particularly focused on customer and use scenarios. So there's a big push, and you can see it when some of the things we've discussed and announced, right? So we have a carbon accounting blockchain system that we've pushed out into the world, which is getting a lot of traction. We also have a system called the One Token, which is supply chain, kind of cradle to grave to tracking for goods and services across the board. And particularly useful for companies building and distributing hardware, and is being used both internally and externally to Microsoft. And so there's this idea that there are the idea is that you have digital transformation, and so you have a bunch of companies that have more or less wholly moved over from paperwork into digital systems. If that's the case, then why are we emailing each other PDFs of invoices and then hoping somebody updates my database to match your database? And so there's this idea that if we had a universal way of interacting with each other, then this would be far easier for us to be able to make these updates happen.
That makes sense. I'm going to come back to you, Jeff. So, I think back to 2017, 2018. I was at Dragon Chain at the time. We were early trying to figure out, enterprise use cases, for permission blockchains, what we're all talking about up here. And at the time, remember, a lot of the infrastructure that was necessary in order to be able to effectively implement it within the enterprise space just wasn't there yet. You know, wallets, my goodness, you know, like how have you been able to address that, you know, now, and how do you make it easy for people to be able to step in and adopt?
So, you know, it's the Wayne Gretzky thing. You don't develop for what's available today. You develop for what's going to be available in the future. And so there were quite a few things that the technology wasn't quite there for when we were starting. But we just went and focused on specific use cases. And, you know, we've been fortunate in that we have picked up quite a few contracts from the DoD. So the United States Space Force is our largest customer. And what we do for them is anytime they launch a spy satellite, so this is the National Security Space Launch Directorate, before they launch that rocket, they run down the pedigree of every single component on the rocket. And we're not just talking about the component, but it is also who was working on that and where was it being worked on. So we do the digitization of the people, places, and the products, and then the interactions between those three are what create the transactions that give you what is known as provenance, because there's a very big difference between traceability, transparency, and provenance. Huge difference.
And I'm just gonna, sorry, let me riff here, but I assume, can you also then in this system have visibility into like who's certified to work on these parts? Were they the certified individuals, the ones that service these individual components, all of that? Full tracking in history?
Yeah, we believe what's being created now, if you go back to Jeffrey Moore's system of record, system of engagement, systems of signals, and we believe there's now this fourth computing system called systems of evidence. And so one of the things about the evidence is it's all about claims. People make all kinds of claims, and there's this law that I just read, Hitchens' law, that anything that can be claimed on the internet without evidence can be refuted on the internet without evidence. And so you have to have evidence to back up any claim that you make. So the provenance chain is all about a system of evidence, which is here's the claim that's being made, and here's the evidence that supports that claim. Let the buyer or the person who's interacting choose whether or not that meets their requirements.
That dovetails into the discussion around AI. I personally am a believer that the AI, acceleration of AI is going to actually accelerate the need for things like NFTs. You know, take a simple use case like eventually we're all showing our license to the police officer on our phone, right? Well, now with AI, you can quickly, you know, recreate someone's insurance card or license, right? So how are you going to authenticate that that is real? How do you guys see NFTs impacting what you guys are doing on the enterprise side?
Yeah, so this is like our next part of our strategy. So when we stopped pursuing that original strategy in 2018, the team kind of dispersed into different parts of the company, got back together, reconvened around a new idea, which was a new way to employ NFT technology. So our platform now is a no-code smart contract development tool. So you drag and drop, essentially, kind of like a website builder, but you kind of provide certain inputs into fields in Salesforce, which essentially write directly to a smart contract template on the back end. So you can very easily interact with a Salesforce user interface. You can create a smart contract. You can deploy that contract from directly inside of Salesforce with a couple clicks, right? So that's the new strategy that Salesforce is pursuing.
Can you give us a simple case study, how someone might use that in practice?
Sure. So like relevant to what your kind of original context for this question was, you might eventually leverage NFTs to represent elements of something that is a part of someone's identity. Like it could be, you know, not necessarily personal information that's being deployed in like to a public blockchain, but perhaps to a permission blockchain or to private blockchain. So the California DMV just started issuing, or is starting to experiment with issuing car titles on-chain. And then there's verified credentials that can potentially be supported by this technology, right? So these are the types of things that eventually people will realize that you can use this technology for. But Jeff and I were talking in, you know, behind the stage. You can create technology and you can put it out into the world, but people won't always use it, you know, exactly as you intended for it to be used. So, you know, you have to be a steward of use cases and applications, but the technology can support verified credentials, identity solutions, and use cases as everything to collectibles. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you guys
Yeah, so Microsoft does a lot with identity.
dip
So
your foot into
verified
the AI
credentials and identities in general is a big deal for Microsoft. And so we have a whole team working on verified credentials and bringing that to market. There's a product called Intra that does a lot of that work. And I agree with a lot of what you said. In fact, a lot of the research that's happening right now at Microsoft Research around identity pertains to like soul-bound tokens and the idea that you could use soul-bound tokens to define not only who you are, but who you share them with. And that plurality of identities is actually the thing that makes up who you are. Because you don't necessarily want to share with the DMV like your Fortnite record. And you don't necessarily want your Fortnite buddies to know what your bank account is. So there's this idea of like progressive privacy, and how do you define portions of your identity that you reveal at any point in time to anyone, or any entity or machine.
Yeah,
But
we
it's like
Can I respond to the NFT thing for a moment? Because I want to correct something that was said here yesterday, and that was, and this is coming from the pride of being an Oregonian. There was a lot of talk about NFTs yesterday and who's the largest seller of NFTs. And what I was very surprised by was I didn't hear the word Nike mentioned, because Nike is the single largest seller of NFTs for money. Last year they did nearly $200 million in revenue off NFTs, which is 3.2x the next 5 players involved. So, and I was in the room when they created the Crypto Kicks, and so we grew out of that whole initiative. So everything that sits underneath the PCN is all about NFTs, but they're not going to be tradable tokens. They're going to be tokens that are going to be used on the network to create value and disclose information and things like that.
fascinating. You know, I'm in the game space now, and you know, we look at both NFTs within our game as well as decentralized identity, and we think, okay, we're a 3D-based avatar game, and as people move between metaverses, they're going to want to bring pieces of themselves with them. They're not going to want to have to create and build up a new profile every time they move to a different platform, you know, within the metaverse. And so we definitely see applicability there, and I see both gaming folks and enterprise folks trying to kind of figure out how that's going to work from a user perspective. How do you guys see NFTs as it relates to provenance? Is that something that, is there an intersection there with what you guys are doing? And if so, what's that look like?
So the simple answer is absolutely. And where I would take that is, you know, when I talked about Conscious Kim interacting with the product, it's her digital twin interacting with the digital twin of the product. And so one of the things that, you know, is coming up, which is the sunset by 2027 of the 2D barcode. We're headed into it. So this is the GS1 standard. So, and why I use that as an example, so if you go into any retail environment in North America and take any consumer product and pass it across a point of sale terminal, it will behave exactly the same way. That does not exist in the industrial manufacturing sector. Just take a look at a pallet of goods. There's all kinds of different barcode labels on it, and nobody talks to each other. And so in the enterprise space where you're talking about this, you used to sell to one enterprise, but in the blockchain world, you got to sell to multiple. It's a team sport. And invariably, you have this, well, this is my intellectual property. I'm not putting my data on your network. And so what this reminds me of is in the early 90s when we had IBM Token Ring, we had Apple Talk, we had Banyan Vines, we had 3Com, we had Ethernet. And then along came this technology, TCP/IP, which bridged all that. And it was an inferior technology to some of those other designs, but it was most common, and it was very simple and easy to use, and it's now the dominant transport technology. That is the exact same thing that is needed in the industrial sector, is a technology that bridges all those different blockchains and solutions, et cetera. And we're stepping forward saying this thing that we built for the Space Force, the Commercial Trust Protocol, if you're all American citizens, thank you, because you paid for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to park that at an entity, nonprofit, let it go open source, to tie in with these regional technology innovation hubs that Secretary Gina Raimondo is calling for in the CHIPS and Science Act. And that, you know, and then we'll just be one of the competitors that is delivering against that standard. So it's the reason that we can call from AT&T to T-Mobile is because there's technology standards in place. That's what's missing here right now.
Yeah, standards, we've been talking about those for a long time now. Unfortunately, I have to go into this area. Just this week, Coinbase CEO said, we might have to bounce from the US. The regulatory environment is definitely challenging. I know in the gaming sector, we're launching a new token right now. How does the regulatory environment impact you guys, your ability to innovate, your ability to not just innovate, but then implement the things that you come up with? And I'm definitely interested in hearing, because you guys all have really differing perspectives. I'm interested in hearing from all three of you on this.
I mean, you go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. So Microsoft is, of course, heavily involved in regulatory space. And generally, we don't take a position on regulation within the US. And for myself, I mean, I think the idea that we need common sense regulation that can protect consumers is correct, but what we have right now is not working. If you look at the enterprise space, though, I would say perhaps the hotter take is that for a lot of these applications, the thing you're looking for is not a chain that would be regulated in the same way as like a chain that you would issue tokens on or NFTs to like a public chain. That regulation there is really private contracts and private contract law and not the kind of SEC or OCC level regulation.
Please, Max.
So the way that it's influenced, I'll just talk about how it's influenced our development and like guidance that we offer to brands, customers of ours. So I mean, like, as far as what we've created, there was all types of ideas thrown out originally. It's, hey, could we enable brands to create loyalty tokens that are like fungible tokens that they use in loyalty rewards networks, et cetera, that are private or shared networks, all these things. These ideas were thrown out. Those got kiboshed because, you know, like those could be speculated on. They could be, depending on how the market treats things, you're subject to penalties based on how people treat things, even if it wasn't the intent when you were creating the assets or creating the technology itself. So we had to consider that. There's other things like different token standards on public networks, like ERC 721 tokens or NFTs are unique in some sense, even if they can be made to be less unique than some others or than they should be. At least each has an ID, kind of like a serial number, that differentiates it from the next. 1155 tokens are less distinguishable from the next, one from the other. So they can be, in a lot of ways, treated like securities. So like we had to avoid enabling the creation of certain types of tokens on our platform. This was an example of like how unclear policy and like treatment of assets and like how things will be acted on by external parties influenced the way that we decided to design the solution that we brought to market.
So in our case, whether it's regulations or governance, I'll use those somewhat interchangeably. That's actually a friend of the PCN, and here's why. If you go back to the sales order, purchase order, what we've discovered is in this platform environment, every commercial transaction on the planet has at least one third-party observer. And in many cases, there's more observers to the transaction than are participants. And so those observers demand to know certain information. They're called regulators. So it's the FDA, it's the FTC, that they want to know what's going on in that transaction. And so we're a system of evidence. So the evidence that the consumer sees is a different set of evidence than the regulator sees because of the vantage point and their credentials. And so the more that the government can clearly articulate, this is what we need to know, that's our friend. And so in the case of the industrial sector, there's a whole bunch of NIST standards, 800-171, 800-161, 853, 838, that say if you're doing this stuff, whether it be semiconductors and microelectronics, you have to have this disclosure. And the acid test of that is the big one that somebody was asking yesterday, is NFTs or blockchain important to the enterprise space? If you're in the clothing and apparel space, absolutely, because there were 3,500 cases of the Customs and Border Patrol intercepting shipments that are coming into the United States for apparel goods. 458 of those were denied. 1,700 are in process for the Forced Labor Protection Act. What's that all about? Chinese forced labor. And you have to prove to the federal government that you don't have that in your product. It's very difficult to prove a negative. What you can do is you can say, well, here's the evidence I have that it's not that. And so the regulations, short summary, help us if they're clearly defined.
Yeah, trying to prove something post hoc, particularly for supply chain, incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. And so you just get hung up.
Wonderful. Now I'm happy to move off of regulation. I'm really curious to know what innovations excite you. What's coming down the pike near term, 12 to 24 months?
I can speak to that a little bit. Microsoft's heavily involved in cryptography as well, so zero-knowledge proofs, zero-knowledge EVMs, other zero-knowledge systems, very important to us, not only within the blockchain space, but also outside of blockchain.
Maybe if you can explain zero-knowledge systems in case some folks don't.
Certainly, yeah, so I'll try to keep it at a normal level. If you think about zero-knowledge systems, it's more or less a way to prove something is true without revealing what that thing actually is. And so the canonical example is you can be asked to show your driver's license, or you can be asked whether or not you're 21 or over. And so a zero-knowledge proof would allow you to say, I'm going to show you a proof that says I'm over 21, but I don't actually have to show you my driver's license or reveal my birth date to you. And we can both be assured that it's correct. And so that's probably the easiest way to describe it, but the extent of it is pretty broad. You can imagine any amount of decision-making or proof sets that can be built within these systems. And that has applicability well outside of blockchain.
Mine's a combination of technology and other things. The thing that excites me the most about the next 5 to 10 years is wildly pervasive 5G everywhere, all the time. That number one, so connectivity. The second thing is I'm very excited about the population dynamics of North America in comparison with much of the rest of the world. It has to do with how our economy is going to perform over time. And then I'm really excited about the intersection of artificial intelligence and natural language processing, because the whole conscious Kim in that retail environment, she's going to have a computational device of some form. Could be a smartphone, maybe these, could be an earpiece in, and she's communicating, and she's having an Iron Woman experience of the interaction of the products, revealing good or bad for you based on her values. Well, there's a whole lot that has to go on in there, but that's a little bit more than 2 years away, but it's a lot fewer than 10.
I'm going to repeat a little bit, sorry, Jeff. But I mean, like, privacy solutions to me are what I'm most excited about. I think they've been like a big inhibitor for general public being able to leverage public blockchain networks and infrastructure. And they've been part of the driver or motivator for enterprises to adopt permissioned strategies, or at least in part. There's plenty of reasons, but that's definitely one of them. And Ari provided an example yesterday that I thought was really cool, that similar to what Jeff was talking about, the example of the driver's license and can you or can you not consume or buy alcohol or go into a bar. But Ari told yesterday, for those that weren't here, a story of like going to a bar, sharing her driver's license with the bouncer, and when you do that, they can see much more than the fact that you're 21 or older. They can see your home address, and they can show up at your home when you don't want them to. So things like zero-knowledge proofs and just being able to validate that you meet a certain threshold or criteria or whatever it is are super important for those reasons, for like individual safety and privacy. So super excited about that. And then to what you were saying, the intersection of AI technology, being able to generate things and then authenticate that they have originated from a human, even when there are actors on a network that are not human, That is super fascinating to me, and I think is going to be like very important focus in tech, especially enterprise tech, in the next 2 years.
Can I pick up on one word he said? You mentioned the word privacy, and you talked about regulations. At the PCN, when we started out at the very beginning, we were doing some work in the legislature in Oregon about privacy. Brigitte, who's here, was working with me on that. And this whole concept of self-sovereign identity is a lightning rod for a couple of trade associations that should be taking a completely different position than they are. The ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation are fighting it. And it's really citizen-centric identity, and we don't believe in data privacy. We believe in data property ownership rights. And so I'm looking forward to legislation along those lines, which all it's going to really require is, and I think it could come from the state of Texas, because property rights in the United States are states' rights, they're not federal rights. And all you need is a governor of a pretty progressive state to sign a bill saying we are declaring data as property, and then you have all the state law, tort law to enforce that. So watch for that.
That's an interesting one. So we've got a few minutes left. Before I get to the last question, I want to ask you guys. So obviously, or not all of us, you probably don't have kids doing too much on social media yet. I do. When mobile phone and social media came around, we thought, oh, this is wonderful. There are downsides to the technology. We see it, any of us who have teenagers and, dealing with some of the challenges they deal with, we've seen that. How do you think about building solutions that address or make sure that we don't have the downside consequences of technology and innovation that we've seen come previously?
Yeah, I think this is pretty far afield. I would say when I think about the downsides of technology, you have a situation where every computer science engineer that goes to college or any engineer at all goes through ethics courses, and they try to establish like an ethical boundary around the work that you do. And I would say that we have unintended consequences, and so we need critique to be able to point out the places where we can do better. And then we also need to execute against not only the critique, but also the future. And so I think the balance there is actually really tough. And we've seen that struggle, in this new AI moment that we're going through. And how do you balance building the future with protecting people? And I think that's a really hard and important question. And part of the stuff that you're talking about, like data as a property right, is an example of one of the ways that we could solve that problem.
I think it comes down to, what you're really drilling into is ethics, morals, and values. And so, I got taught a lesson one time by the chairman of Johnson & Johnson. I was in a meeting where somebody said something about, that's the values of the company. They don't mean that much to me. And this guy put his hand on his arm and said, stop right there. And he pulled up the J&J credo. And I know one of the guys in the audience here used to work at J&J. And every single decision that corporation makes is based on that credo, which is the values of that corporation. And I think that's, as corporations get bigger, they get further away from their founding values. And I think those values need to be revisited. And the whole data property ownership thing is in the top 5 of the values of our organization. That will never be violated, period.
Yeah, I mean, people are building with boundaries, I think, is like one way to do it. Ethics and like a code of ethics or a credo is a boundary. It's a reminder of a boundary that you have. We have this exercise at Salesforce that Mark Benioff coined, the V2 MOMs: vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures. So every year, top of the year, end of the previous year, you go through an exercise with your team. You kind of reset as a group on what your vision is, like what your charter is, what values you're going to carry forward with, and how you're going to adhere to them in the methods of what you're trying to do to accomplish that vision. So this is like our strategy, and it's like a reminding exercise for what we do in development. But at the same time, to your point, sometimes things that you build have unintended consequences, and you just have to be able to react to that and do so with your values in mind as you do.
Wonderful. Now, I'll finish up with this. Our previous speaker talked about the inflection point, inflection point that's happening right now, particularly as it relates to blockchain. Take 20 seconds. 10 years from now, what are we all going to be doing that right now we're all going, gosh, I have no idea how we're going to get there. What are we going to be doing in 10 years? How are we going to be acting, behaving, or what product might be out there that we're using every day and blockchain is behind it and we don't even think about it anymore, like TCP/IP.
I would say one of the biggest breakthroughs will really be around agentic, like working with agents. So we have agents that will be part of our lives, and they'll interface with the things that we know and the things that we own and the things that we can get access to in order to be able to present us what we want. And yeah.
And I would, similarly, I believe that the big thing that will happen in the next 10 years is cobotics, which is human-machine partnership to solve specific tasks. And that will get better and better and better. And so you'll be able to have, an assistant, literally, that can go act on your behalf with authority. So.
Yeah, I'm just excited for a day where I don't sit at a laptop all day, to be honest. Which is what they're getting at.
Days like today.
Yeah. And luckily yesterday, thank you, T-Mobile.
So your avatar's in the Zoom while you're up here, right?
Yeah, or even there's this old video of a guy serving himself coffee. It's he recorded himself, with a background filter on a Zoom meeting where he delivers himself coffee. But yeah, being able to not be tied to your machine in the way that you are today, and being able to still benefit from interacting and leveraging your machine as an agent or whatever version of technology you're interacting with to accomplish the same outcomes or be even more efficient. That's it.
Wonderful. Max, Jeff, thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you guys.